Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and Master Certified Life Coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is all about the joys and challenges of coming out later in life. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your Master Certified Coach and Midlife Mentor, and I am so glad to be here with you again for this week's episode. But just quick, before we dive in, I would like to invite you to have a book club experience, but with the Women in the Middle podcast instead of a book. It's perfect for you when you feel like you're deep into the midlife experience and craving connection with other like-minded women. The thing is, you are not alone. The podcast club is all about more midlife connections so that you can love your life more after 50. It's also low-key, insightful, and fun. There are prizes too, and the ability to cancel at any time. Check it out at www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab, and you can join right there. Okay, now let me tell you about my amazing guests. Today's interview is with two women who both realized something about themselves after long-term marriages and children. Anne-Marie Zanzal and Barb Rowlandson are the team from Lotus Group Coaching, and they both came out later in life as lesbians. Anne-Marie was 52 and Barb was 46 when they came out. No, they're not a couple, but work colleagues. Anne-Marie is a graduate of Yale Divinity School, an ordained minister in the Progressive United Church of Christ, hospice chaplain, bereavement counselor, coming out expert, and divorce coach. Barbara Rowlandson is an author, coach, producer, and content strategist with Anne-Marie Zanzal Coaching. She is a graduate of the University of Toronto and currently earning a Master's of Counseling Psychology at Yorkville University. Barbara is also a humanist officiant with the Ontario Humanist Society, providing humanist life services in the Simcoe County, Muskoka, and Kawartha Lakes regions of Ontario, Canada. Anne-Marie and Barb have used their experiences as later-in-life lesbians to help thousands of women come out and embrace their authentic ideas through Anne-Marie's podcast, Coming Out and Beyond, coaching, and prodigious content production about the later-in-life experience. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Hi, Anne-Marie and Barbara. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Women in the Middle podcast.
Thank you, Susie, for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, that was Anne-Marie and Barb. And as we go along, we will make sure that we know who's talking at what time to make sure it's not confusing. So we'll just make that point a little bit at the beginning. So you two ladies, I was so excited to have you on. It's one of those weird situations in podcast land where you're just out there doing your thing and you end up meeting people and the world connects us, the universe connects us in strange ways. So with Anne-Marie and I met in a podcast coaching group, and Barbara and I met at a farmer's market in small town Ontario. She had beautiful flowers and I needed to know more. And before we knew it, we're talking podcasts all day, all the time. And I knew that you two would be amazing, amazing guests to talk about what's going on with some midlife gals at this point in their lives. So let's get started. If you could just talk a little bit about your experiences, a little solo experience and then together experience because you do work together. What was going on for you in your 40s and how did your life roll out?
Well, this is Anne-Marie, and it's really interesting that you asked that question because I'm somebody that came out later in life, but I didn't come out later in life until my 50s. Actually, I was 52 when I came out. But in my 40s, I wanted to, my kids were they were actually really weren't older. They were 2 to 14 at the time. I have 4. And I went back to and got my master's degree from Yale Divinity School when I was 42 years old. And I became a chaplain, because I always wanted to work with people. And I ended up working in hospice for about 7 years. So that was my 40s. But in this program, in my 50s, I came out later in life as a lesbian. And that's a whole nother story for my 50s. So I'll let Barb go now. And she can
I love it when the decades make perfect chapters. So Barbara, what happened with your story?
So my 40s was a time where I did come out. I came out when I was 45. And as Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, I had been married for 21 years. And my ex-husband and I had come through sort of a period of turbulence in that we had operated a store together, and it ended up going under. And he ended up finding some more stable employment. I ended up finding stable employment. And things were just sort of leveling out for us, and life was starting to get a little bit better. And as often I think it happens when our life stabilizes a little bit, it gives us room to deal with some of the things that maybe have gone undealt with. And I was in what I would characterize as a very lonely marriage. And I came out as a result of a catalyst experience. So in the later in life community, when we talk about a catalyst, it's often a person. Sometimes it's an event that happens that precipitates big life change. So for some people, that could be a job loss, a serious illness, losing a parent. But often in the late in life community, when we talk about a catalyst, we mean a person, and that person makes us realize we're not quite as straight as we thought we were. And that was my experience. So when I was 45, I had a catalyst experience, and that caused me to reevaluate my sexuality. And I ended up leaving my marriage. And that created a lot of turbulence in my life. I had a period where I became quite ill and went on a sick leave for 6 months from my job, which I ultimately didn't go back to. I became precariously housed without really secure housing. I entered a period where I wasn't living with my children. And sometimes I characterize this period as, my life burned to the ground, and it was my responsibility, and it was my opportunity to rebuild it in a fashion that was more suitable to who I authentically am. And that's just what I did. And here I am today. I'm 52 today, and my life is markedly different than it was in my early 40s.
Wow, what beautiful stories. And what you call the catalyst, I love thinking about it that way. I guess in my work, I've been calling it a wake-up call, and it's not necessarily specific to a person, but there is certainly a shared experience that many of us have in midlife that something jarring happens. And in your experiences, I guess for a while I was calling it creates a bit of a midlife funk where you often know something's off or you feel stuck, but you're not exactly sure what it was. So did that kind of thing, is that something you experienced as well?
Well, this is Anne-Marie. That's a really complicated question because Barb came out one way and I actually came out another way. I did not have a catalyst, unless you want to say my catalyst as an event was my ordination. I got ordained and I actually came out 3 weeks later. And so there's two different schools of thought of that. The first school of thought is very intellectual, that I had been working for a goal for 10 years and, I achieved that goal. And so my brain was free to think about things that I had been pushing aside, or that God ordains your whole self to ministry. And so when God ordained my whole self, the part of myself that was queer also got ordained. And so the spiritual part of that, so whatever way you want to think about it, you can. And so for me, I'm somebody who always sort of knew. My first time I ever thought, oh gosh, maybe I'm gay, I was in my 20s, but I came from a very religiously conservative home. I was expected to get married and have babies, and I am an overachiever. So I did that, as I said before. And, like a lot of women, I really did not think of my sexuality at all. When I was raising children, I was busy raising kids. And for me, it wasn't, yes, it was the ordination, but for my entire life, I had a missing piece. And the name of my book is actually called Authentic Peace. It's a play on the word peace, because I kept looking for something. And a lot of the women Barb and I attract in our coaching program are very educated professionals. They have all kinds of degrees. We've had tons of doctors, tons of lawyers, tons of psychologists in the program. And I think it's because we keep getting education. Barb's getting her master's right now. I mean, we keep getting education and we're like trying to find what's wrong, because we've been told by society that we need to do this thing, and we do it. We do it successfully. I was married 27 years. But something's not right. And so for me, and eventually for Barb, because, hers was a catalyst and that started on her path. But for me, I was someone who always sort of knew. So I came out with no catalyst. I came out saying, I need to go figure this out. And that has to do with my work in hospice, because I had been working in hospice for a long time. And what I knew, what the dying had taught me, is people don't regret the things they've done. If they've done something wrong or done something that really didn't turn out great, they make meaning out of it. But they do regret the things they didn't do. So I had told my husband, my ex-husband now, 6 years before I was gay. And he said, no, you're not. And I said, oh, okay. Because I really didn't want to. I knew what was going to happen, and I just didn't want to have to go through all that. I mean, I stood on the precipice for 10 years before I took the step. I mean, first time I ever thought about it really concretely was at 42. And then it took me 10 years to take the step. And so for a lot of people, and for like Barb and I, it's about our sexuality. But all your listeners have a missing piece too. There's something they need to do, or something they need to explore. And you gotta you gotta get out of your comfort zone and confront the fear zone so you can go to the learning and growth zone.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. In midlife, it really is a time where we finally have a little bit of space to think and to be a little bit more present and to catch those thoughts and to feel those feelings. And if we invite curiosity in, we'll eventually figure it out. But it can even feel scary to be curious, because unlike the rest of our lives, we don't have a plan for this part, We had a plan. I'm also an overachiever, and I know a lot of the listeners are overachiever, perfectionist types, and we're really good with plans. We buy the planners. We love the planners. And we have things planned for a couple of decades. We know the roadmap forward until we don't. And what so many women that I speak to talk about is just, I don't even know what I want. So what you're saying is that there's something missing. There is an understanding that something is off or missing. And to figure it out, it's fascinating. Your stories are different and similar, and it must just be so daunting because it uproots so much of what you've established. Wow. So once you both decided to move into it a little bit, or a lot, I guess both of you had a decision where you moved in a lot. How can you describe that feeling of conquering fear and moving in to the unknown?
Well, conquering fear doesn't happen all at once. It is steady steps towards making change. We have something in our groups called One Gay Thing, which we put in the Facebook groups. So we challenge the members of the groups to do one gay thing a week, and so a gay thing can be put a rainbow bracelet on, wear a pin that is supportive of the LGBTQ community, for people further along, go on a dating app, something like that. And so conquering that fear is taking all those little steps. I was terrified. Absolutely, absolutely terrified. And you just said something, Susie. And I can't remember what it was, but it really struck a chord because this is terrifying. You are like, curiosity. That's what you said. You said something about curiosity, and I was curious. I was like, what would it be like to be in a relationship with a woman? And what would it be like to have my emotional, physical, spiritual, and intellectual needs met? Because my ex-husband, bless his soul, cannot do that because, first of all, he can't, but also because he's a man and my needs are met by a woman. And so trusting myself enough to be curious about that and also make the necessary changes. Like my ex-husband and I, like when he knew that I needed to go and do this, we quickly went through so typically when people are coming out later in life, they try to open up their marriage. Barb and I have a lot of reasons why we don't think that's a good idea. Because it causes a lot of chaos and inviting another person into your marriage while you're trying to figure something like this out is it's really insane. Barb and I, we become outspoken about this because in the community, it was like you could not say anything against that in the beginning. But now Barb and I are like, no, we've seen too many people be hurt. And we're going to just speak out against it. So we had that open marriage thing, polyamory. No. Both my ex-husband and I were very monogamous people. We knew that just wasn't for us. And then, we talked about a threesome and, I was like, honey, if I am, going to be with a woman, you're not going to be there. That was not I had no desire for that. And so, when I realized that we were making all these changes in our relationship, when we had those conversations, my ex and I knew that our marriage was going to have to come to an end because I needed to go and explore that. And then once I finally let it in, the universe moved so incredibly fast that everything fell into place pretty quickly for me.
I love when the universe does that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did differently this time was I Googled late in life lesbian and I found a support group of other women who were going through the exact same thing. And I found my community and that changed everything. A couple months later, there was a woman in that community that who'd been out for a really long time. And she contacted me. I immediately put her in the friend zone and being an old lesbian that she is, she's like, that's what every woman says. And she goes, I'll bide my time. And eventually about 6 months later, I started dating her and I'm married to her now. So everything really fell quite quickly into place for me, which is a little unusual, right, Barb? Would you say that's
for things to fall so quickly into place?
Yeah.
Is it unusual? I don't know if we can characterize it as unusual, but it's certainly special.
Yes.
And I think, when we talk about this later in life experience and Susie, you earlier had asked, what does that feel like when you are confronted with that moment? I think it's fair to say, at least certainly in my experience, that we have this almost existential crisis moment in our lives where our needs, values, and priorities become extremely clear. That can only happen in a circumstance where you are having this existential moment. Mm-hmm. And Anne-Marie, for you, I think that meant that you became very clear about what you needed in relationship, mm-hmm. and you recognized it mm-hmm. very soon after you met your wife. And because you had that recognition, you were able to embrace it. And things happened pretty rapidly from there. Mm-hmm. Does that happen for everybody? No. But I think when we're a little bit farther along in life, we have some wisdom behind us, we have some experience behind us, and we're much clearer on our priorities, then relationships can gel much more quickly. And we see this within our population of women that we work with, that it tends to be the older they are when they do meet somebody, the relationship gels. Like those are the ones who are moving in and getting married quick, right? Because
well, yeah, and our like
wasting time.
And for the women that are single that are join our groups and who've never been married, we've had a lot of women that have gone through that have never been married. They're searching for something and then they're like, oh, I should be dating women. That's what it is. And so they figured out, we find that they go because they don't, first of all, they don't have to deal with getting divorced. They don't have to deal with husbands. They don't have to deal with children. And so a lot of times, especially if they're professional women too, they have this certain self-confidence about them. And so they are single ladies are our quick movers and the women that are in their 70s because they're very aware of time.
Oh yeah, huge time sensitivity with us.
Yeah. And so they really want to like go and experience life. And I find that they move through the process of coming out of what we call in our community, the messy middle, when life just falls apart and then you have to put it back together. They go through that incredibly quickly. And most of their families are like, Mom, I just want you to be happy. Or, Mom or older person, I just want you to be happy. Like it's very different when people are in their 70s than versus 40s or 50s.
Oh, that's so interesting. And Barbara, can you explain a little bit how fear showed up for you and what it was like to take those early steps?
Sure. Well, earlier you had referenced being in a funk. And that's how I would have characterized about the last 10 years of my marriage. I knew I was unhappy, but I was really too afraid to make a change. And frankly, I was in my comfort zone. So even though I wasn't happy where I was comfortable where I was because it was kind of, the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. Only, well, I don't know if my catalyst would appreciate me calling her the devil, but the devil showed up.
If you call her that.
Well, she can like it or not like it. It's none of my business how she feels about it. But for the purposes of this conversation, she was the devil, and showed me what may be possible in the future, what I might be missing, and that's when my existential crisis kicked in. And for me, that felt like, honestly, Susie, I felt like my life was at stake. Wow. It was a do or die moment for me. Was I going to continue to choose to live in my comfort zone in this lower level of existence? Or was I going to try? Could I live with the idea of not trying? Mm-hmm. And the answer for me was no. Well, that is scary as heck. But my priorities became much more clear. It's almost like, when you go on vacation and you're in a new environment and everything seems so interesting and you take it all in and you're hyper aware of your surroundings. And I think when I did take that step out of my comfort zone, I became hyper aware of my world. And it also informed future behavior in other ways. Now, here's a really interesting thing. So I lived with a lifelong phobia as well. I had a fear of driving. I didn't learn to drive until I was 47 years old.
Wow.
And I think maybe I started taking lessons when I was 46, and I didn't get my first part of my graduated license till I was 47. And it was like legit fear. I remember going to the doctor and talking about this problem, and my doctor observing me and saying, "Do you realize that just talking about driving, you're breaking out into hives?" Like that's how much of a physical, emotional reaction and anxiety reaction I would have to the idea of driving. And when I got out of my comfort zone, and I already made the biggest change, the most terrifying change I could make in my life, which was leaving my marriage of 21 years. And it made conquering this other fear seem like, well, if I could do that, I could do this. And just like Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, change doesn't come like in one big thunderclap. I mean, the leaving may come in a thunderclap, but the changes you make towards your new life doesn't come in one big thunderclap. It comes in incremental steps. So I tackled that fear of driving incrementally. And a phobia that I never thought I would be able to conquer, I did. And I'm a fully licensed driver today. Still don't love driving in the city, but I can do it. So it really proved to me that, and it gave me confidence that I really can do hard things, and that I'm a much more capable person than I gave myself credit for before the big life change.
And I want to piggyback on that because I have had clients who've come out later in life, and all of a sudden they had alopecia and it went away. They had MS and it went away. So we have a lot of women that have like health problems. A lot of the anxiety people experience and depression go away once they come out, because consciously or subconsciously, they have been hiding who they are. And that wreaks havoc on our bodies, but also on our nervous systems and on our brains. And so once they start this process, a lot of the things they've had problems with in the past seem to either go away or lessen.
That is fascinating. And
it is fascinating. We need someone to study that.
Yeah. And very understandable if you feel the weight. I mean, we all know that stress is incredibly hazardous to your health. So to carry something, however long it is, that you know is off, even if you don't know what it is, it's just like, it's so heavy and so stressful. And there must be a fear that you'll never figure it out until you start to figure it out. And then there's that kind of stress, because then you start to get a sense of, oh, this is the future. This is the way forward. Oh, I have to do big, scary things. Wow. Wow. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe you have some statistics, or I don't know anything about this topic. So are women more likely to come out later in life?
So there is, unfortunately, we don't have like scientific statistics. It's more anecdotal. So there's a revolution going on right now. There are more women coming out later in life than ever. And one of the reasons I know this is because I have become friendly with an organization called Our Path, which is for the straight spouse. Okay. So they started their own, the spouses need support too. Initially, it was started by women whose husbands came out as gay. So it was almost 100% women. When I came out 8 years ago, some of the men started to go over there. They are now 30% male, because they did it like that's 30% of their people that they're seeing are now men whose wives have come out later in life, or men and women whose partners have come out as trans. So they are getting more and more spouses of people to get support. So later in life, so there's a revolution going on, and Barb and I we were in the beginning of the wave, and the pandemic had a lot to do with it too, because within the pandemic, people started to think about their lives. Barb, did you want to add something?
Well, I just did want to add that now I don't have that particular research paper handy, but I have come across peer-reviewed research that demonstrates that women do statistically come out later than men. Don't want to give an exact year number. I think it was around 10 years, but don't quote me on that. But there's powerful and compelling reasons for women who come out later in life. And that is because we are disproportionately affected by compulsory heterosexuality, and societal conditioning.
Barb, can you define compulsory heterosexuality?
Sure. Compulsory sexuality is the assumption by default that we are all straight. And there are a lot of societal expectations on women that revolve around our gender roles. Many of us, especially in our age demographic, have been conditioned, even if we weren't religious, there's still such strong social conditioning that says, we're going to be good girls. We're going to be attractive, but not promiscuous. Our goal is to get married, to have children, to be giving of ourselves, and that is a virtue. And to just follow a formula of what it means to be a good woman. And for so many of us who come out later in life, we have had we've been strongly compelled to follow along with that formula because we have a need for love and acceptance, and we think that's how we're going to find it. And the only problem is we follow this formula, but there's this missing piece within ourselves, like we talked about earlier, that feels like, is this all there is? What's missing? I don't know what's missing. Well, maybe it's that I need to get a hobby, or maybe it's I need to be more involved in my community, or maybe I need to get another degree, or any number of things that we take on because we're a smart group of people and a capable group of people. We take on all kinds of things to try and fill that void. And unfortunately, none of those things are going to fill the void because the missing piece is that our sexuality authentically is not aligned with the lives that we're living.
And I want to also add that as women, when we are young, we are told that relationships with men are difficult. Everybody is told that. So you don't understand whether, is it just difficult or is it difficult because I should be in a relationship with somebody of my own gender. We are told that there's a lot of things around beauty and how we're supposed to look. And so for a lot of us, we do these mental gymnastics because we know we're attracted to women, but then we're also smart enough to know that women, our bodies are used in advertising. Our 90% of all great art is pictures of women. And so we do these convoluted gymnastics in our mind to say, oh, it's just society. I'm not really attracted to her, or I'm not attracted to girls or something like that, especially if we received very strong messages. And one of the questions we always ask is what were you told about gay people when you were young? What were the messages you received? A lot of the guys that I've worked with, their dads would say, don't be a little, and some of the women, their moms would say, are you a lesbian? Or they would talk about the neighbors down the street and they may have been a gay couple and people would say bad things about it. So what ends up happening is we end up having what is called internalized homophobia, or, I forget the word, internalized homophobia. And we start to think, oh, I can't be gay because it's a bad thing. I can't be gay because it's wrong, instead of being like, oh, I'm gay. This is normal. And it wasn't until I came out and I took my straight glasses off and put my queer glasses on that I realized that my life had been divided around this. So in my book, I wrote a story about my summer when I was 14. I had my first kiss with a boy, and I had some very innocuous sexual play with a girl. The kiss with the boy got filed away as a pleasant little memory, and the little sexual play with the girl got filed away as something of shame. And so for years, it was like something that I had in my brain that was shameful. And it wasn't until I came out that I was like, oh, that was perfectly appropriate for a young girl that likes girls. But I didn't even I was raised very strictly Catholic. I felt
Does not compute.
Right. Yeah. And also too, when I had sex with the boy for the first time, I was like, this isn't that great, but I was smart enough to know that I had been told that having sex outside of marriage was wrong. So I was like, oh, I guess I just must feel guilty because, I'm not keeping up to my mom's standards, and so, lots of confusing stuff. It's really hard for women to figure out that they're not straight because we have so many messages to conform.
That is so interesting. Sorry, Barb,
go ahead. To extend on that thought a little bit too, and we can see from your example, Anne-Marie, why representation and education are so very important for young people. It's not something we had. And, talk about lack of representation, or negative representation of what it means to be queer. When you drill it down even further to representations of lesbians, not just queer people or gay men, there was no representation.
Right.
I can think of many examples of negative representation of gay men, but very, very, very few examples of what it meant to be lesbian.
Well, and I want to add on that too. And if you're listening to this, you can't see Barb right now. And Barb is what we know is known as a femme lesbian. She's very femme. She's very pretty. If you saw her out in the world, and I'm going to challenge y'all on this, you see some women and they have a glass closet. They're gay, but Barb, you'd never know. So, and myself, I have, as time has gone on, I have gotten to more in the center, but I used to be incredibly feminine like Barb before I came out. I'm still considered feminine. If you see me with my wife is masculine of center. So I'm the femme in that relationship. But the thing is that there was no representation. And if you, Barb and I noticed this again, anecdotally, women who come out later in life also tend to be more on the feminine side, especially in our age group, 45 plus, because we didn't have representation. Because when 30 years ago, the only out lesbians 40 years ago were the very masked lesbians. And you look at them and you're like, I don't look like that. I can't. Yeah. And if you don't explore the community, which I didn't do and Barb didn't do, if you don't explore the community, you didn't know there's a whole genre of what's called lesbian. So we didn't know that. And so you're looking at the women that are the out lesbians and you're like, I don't recognize that. I don't identify that way. I don't look that way. And so it's just really confusing.
Oh, I'm getting that message loud and clear. So just to wrap up, I want to ask you what you'd like to promote and how people can get a hold of you. We have just scratched the surface here, but your stories have been so powerful. And as women in midlife, we know that life's hard when you're trying to figure all of this stuff out. And we finally have time to pay attention. Thank goodness. Okay, so how can we get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of us is to go to my website, AnneMarieZanzal.com. Both Barb and I work together there. And first of all, we have, if this is something you've thought about for yourself, there's so many resources on there. So we would love to have you go there and explore and then reach out. And also too, so many times people think they have to be absolutely 100% sure they want to come out before they talk to either Barbara and I. And you don't have to do that. You can just talk to us in the beginning and then come back months later. It's absolutely fine.
And I know whatever events you have coming up in the future will always be on the website. So Thank you so much. You've really shared a lot and I've learned so much and I know our listeners have as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Susie.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed meeting my guests as much as I enjoyed having the chance to talk to them about their midlife experience. Okay, now remember, being the queen of your brain domain is the best way to be. If you want to get unstuck, clear about what you want with the confidence and courage to go after it, then don't waste another minute. Go ahead and book your free momentum call with me and apply for the Women in the Middle Academy. Let's see if coaching together makes sense for you. Head over to www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com. The Women in the Middle podcasts are all about how to love your life again after 50 with more clarity and intention than ever before. And the focus is on coaching you to incorporate mindfulness as a regular practice. This is how you put yourself on your agenda. And my friend, it is about time. Finally, for show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab and look for episode 396. You'll also see links there for my new show, Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. Thanks so much for listening. It really is time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. I'm Susie Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you next week.